and armed by Great Britain, the world's supreme military power, turning their amateur guard units into the seeds of a formidable Jewish army, complete with special forces and an officer corps. But it was also during the revolt that some Jews, facing fascism in Europe and carnage in Palestine, decided that mere passive defense was national suicide, and when Jewish terrorism first appeared on the landscape. This is therefore a story of two nationalisms, and of the first major explosion between them. The rebellion was Arab, but the Zionist counter-rebellion, the Jews' military, economic, and psychological transformation, is a vital, overlooked element in the chronicle of how Palestine became Israel. For it was then, not in 1948, that Palestine's Jews consolidated the demographic, geographic, and political basis of their state to be. And it was then that portentous words like partition and Jewish state first appeared on the international diplomatic agenda. Yet ultimately, the uprising also persuaded Britain that its 2-decade Zionist experiment had proven too costly in blood, treasure, and the goodwill of broad swaths of its empire. As war with Hitler loomed, the Chamberlain government determined it was high time that Palestine's doors, virtually the only ones still open to Jews, be shuttered. Few decisions in the 20th century would carry repercussions as profound. The listener might imagine that events of such magnitude would already have been amply investigated. This is, after all, the most written about of the world's ongoing disputes, having earned itself the all-encompassing designation as the Middle East conflict. And yet that same listener, keen to learn more, encounters scarcity. A few pages, or at most a chapter, in wider histories of this land. Remarkably, no single general interest account has yet been written of this formative but forgotten insurgency. The few books dedicated to the topic have been confined to academia. The first in English was published only in the mid-1990s. Its author, Ted Swedenborg, wrote of being stunned by the dearth of information about this momentous insurgency, which he realized had been either ignored or denigrated by mainstream Israeli and Western historiography. In Hebrew, there is likewise just one full-length academic study to date. That gap may be understandable. Zionism's champions have always regarded it as a struggle for self-determination, not the denial of the same to others. The conventional Israeli national story progresses steadily from the early immigration waves and the Balfour Declaration through the nation-building of the 1920s and 1930s, the agony of the Holocaust, and finally the redemption of statehood. A large-scale concerted uprising against that forward-marching tale seems an unwelcome disruption in the narrative arc. The near-total gap in Arabic has its own reasons. Mustafa Kaba, a historian at Israel's Open University, laments that in Palestinian collective memory, the rebellion has been marginalized, even silenced, completely overshadowed by the memory of the 1947-48 Nakba catastrophe. It seems natural, he observes, to dwell on the Nakba, due to the magnitude of the disaster, and the fact that much of the blame can be attributed to external factors, the Zionists, the Arab states, the British, and other actors. Dealing with 1936 to 39 requires much more soul-searching. It was in view of this apparent deficit that I set to work, convinced I had lit upon an undiscovered blank space on the creaking bookshelf of all things Arab-Israeli. Thus began a project spanning research on 3 continents, in 3 languages, over 5 years. Still, it is a dependable rule that a writer rarely walks alone. Since I began my research, 2 new books on the revolt have gone to press: Britain's Pacification of Palestine by Matthew Hughes and The Crime of Nationalism by Matthew Craig Kelly. Both are valuable, rigorous works of scholarship. Hughes's is a meticulous examination of the military and legal means Britain used to quash the rebellion. Kelly's is a